Happy Friday. So you thought that our American Congress could not be any more embarrassing than it is, right? You thought there's really no way that our current Congress could further humble itself in the eyes of the American people more than it already has. You thought we'd sort of bottomed out, right? You thought that was true, but you were wrong. Oh my God, were you wrong? This is amazing in all the wrong ways. Meet Republican Congressman Curt Clawson of the great state of Florida. Curt Clawson represents Florida's 19th district. He's a Tea Party guy. He won a special election there last month to fill the seat of a former congressman named Trey Raydell. You may remember him resigning after being convicted of cocaine possession. So if you're the guy who replaced the guy who got kicked out of Congress for cocaine possession, there's sort of nothing that you can do to be more embarrassing than the coke guy, right? But that shouldn't stop you from trying. And God bless Curt Clawson, he is trying his best. After getting sworn in as a member of Congress just late last month, Congressman Clawson landed a plum assignment. He was assigned to the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The Foreign Affairs Committee is a big deal, especially if you are a freshman member of Congress. You're dealing with all sorts of important world issues, arms control, our diplomatic relationship with countries around the world. It's a big deal. Yesterday, Congressman Clawson's subcommittee held a big hearing on U.S. relations with India. And India is a big and influential country. Our relationship with them is always important. Our relationship with them is particularly important right now because they just elected a whole new government and a whole new prime minister. So the Foreign Affairs Committee called to testify two top officials of the U.S. government. The guy you see on the right is an official in the U.S. Commerce Department. The woman you see on the left is an official at the U.S. State Department. These are both senior members of the United States government. They are Americans. They work for the U.S. government as senior officials. Let me reiterate that. Senior U.S. officials. Congressman Clawson, take it away.
I am familiar with your country. I love your country. And I'm hopeful with the new change in regime that the future and the land of promise and the land of opportunity of India can finally become so. And I understand the complications of so many languages and so many cultures and so many histories all rolled up in one. So just as your capital is welcome here to produce good-paying jobs in the U.S., I'd like our capital to be welcome there and there to be freedom of capital, so that both sides are on the same territory. And I ask cooperation and commitment and priority from your government in so doing. Can I have that?
I think your question is to the Indian government, and we certainly share your sentiments, and we certainly will advocate that on behalf of the U.S.
Of course.
Not a skit. Our actual Congress. I need a new pen, I'm sorry. Republican Congressman Curt Clawson, everybody. Your tax dollars at work. Amazing. That amazing moment. Humiliating moment, really. Flagged today by Foreign Policy magazine. You can see their headline, Freshman Congressman Mistakes Senior Government Officials for Foreigners. Foreign Policy magazine helpfully noting, quote, during the hearing, Congressman Clawson repeatedly touted his deep knowledge of the Indian subcontinent and his favorite Bollywood movies. I love it when you guys do the, oh my God, how could you possibly be a member of Congress? You thought that it could not be possible for Congress to be more embarrassing than it already is, and then along came today. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? Republican Congressman Curt Clawson, thank you for redefining wrong. Wow. The United Nations recognizes 193 nations in the world. There are 193 member states in the United Nations. As far as our country goes, which is called the United States, we don't treat all of those places equally as countries, the ones recognized by the UN. I mean, some places we recognize as countries, but we refuse to have formal relations with them, places like Iran or North Korea. We don't have embassies there. Then there's little tiny countries that we do recognize as countries, but I guess maybe the reasoning is they're too small to squeeze in an embassy. Places like Dominica and St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, all of those little islands and a bunch more, they get all their embassy services in Barbados rather than having a specific U.S. embassy on each one of those lovely islands. So the overall list of places that are considered to be countries on this earth internationally, that overall list is always a little bit in flux around the edges. That's in part why we have wars. But as far as the United States is concerned, there is a hard and fast count of the number of nations on Earth where our government, the U.S. government, maintains an embassy. We have U.S. embassies abroad in 169 countries. And consider this. Right now, there is nobody home at a quarter of those embassies around the globe. In 1/4 of the world's nations where we have an embassy, and therefore we are supposed to have an ambassador at our embassy, we don't have an ambassador. A quarter of the Earth. And that's because our Congress is a disaster. Our Congress, our current Congress, has some sort of inexplicable injury which prohibits them from doing even the basic non-controversial work of keeping the government going, or recognizing American officials sitting in front of them with name tags. Approving ambassadors is not like passing Obamacare or something complicated, right? Approving ambassadors is not the world's most controversial thing. But this Congress cannot even do that. Not this Congress. It's astonishing. And the problems with this Congress have been building throughout this Congress. This is the least productive Congress in the modern history of the United States. But at this particular moment in the news, with our roaring international crisis headlines, right, it is newly shocking and newly problematic that these countries that aren't just faraway places, these countries that directly affect the most important things going on in our own country right now, these are places where we're basically staffing our embassies with temps, thanks to Congress. The tens of thousands of kids and young families who've been turning up on the U.S. border, thus creating the biggest domestic news story of the summer, those kids are coming from 3 specific countries in Central America: El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. The United States is doing intensive, multi-layered diplomacy with these countries to try to stop the flow of these kids, try to stop them leaving those countries to come to our country. We're running ad campaigns in those countries. We're sending cabinet officers to those 3 countries. We sent the vice president to those countries to go meet with the leaders of those nations. The presidents of those 3 nations came to the White House today to meet personally with President Obama. But you know what? When anybody from the United States goes to one of those 3 countries, Guatemala, to try to do this very important work for probably the most important thing going on in the United States right now, there's no U.S. ambassador there. We have no U.S. ambassador in Guatemala. We just don't have one. Haven't gotten around to it. Why bother? It's just a country that's sending tens and thousands of its kids to our border. Why would we need somebody there to answer the phone or do America's work there? If you do not believe that the crisis of unaccompanied Central American kids on our border is the biggest news story facing the country right now, if you don't think that's the biggest story in the country, it's probably because you think the biggest news story facing the country right now is Russia. Also a reasonable choice. Also a place where we do not have an ambassador right now. In Russia, we have been in this incredibly tense, incredibly dramatic standoff for basically 6 months now over Russia rekindling the idea of a Russian empire, taking over parts of their neighboring countries. The war that Russia has been cooking next door in Ukraine last week, of course, resulted in the apparent shoot-down of a passenger jet carrying 300 civilians who had absolutely nothing to do with that war. The U.S. government is now accusing Russia of not just aiding the pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine, but of firing artillery rounds across the border from Russia into Ukraine. The stuff between us and Russia right now is off the hook, and it is getting more intense every day. We have no ambassador to Russia because that's Congress's job, and so therefore it is a job that is not done. Anything that Congress is responsible for, we apparently just have to get by without, including having someone in charge of American interests in 1/4 of the nations on the earth. And it's not like Congress is only shirking its responsibility on stuff that people don't care about. I mean, just take the Russia issue. Americans are paying attention and Americans care. The new CNN poll on how Americans view Russia shows that over the course of this really tense period that we're having with them, over the course of the last 5 months, the proportion of Americans who view Russia in a favorable light has dropped in 5 months from 41% to 19%. That's a plunge. Americans are horrified at how Russia is behaving. Their favorability rating dropped more than 20 points in just a few months. That's unheard of. And for a major world power to be viewed by Americans with only a 19% approval rating, that is terrible to the point where it is almost shocking. But you know who Americans hate more then we hate Russia. More than we hate Russia, we hate our own Congress. The latest CNN poll puts the Russia approval rating at 19%. The latest CNN poll puts the latest Congress approval rating at 14%. So we American citizens are basically in a Cold War with the 202 area code. And this Congress, being the most failed Congress of all time, this Congress that has done less than any other Congress in the modern history of Congress, that fact about them has been true all year long. It's been evident all year. By rights, this really should be the center of what we talk about when we talk about Washington right now. This is truly historic failure. But right now, this week, that failure is newly horrible and newly consequential. And that is in part because the world is on fire and we don't have ambassadors approved for the places that we are actively involved in intense and consequential negotiations with, right? Places like Guatemala and Russia, where there are these huge crises that really affect Americans right now. That's part of it. But the other part of it is that we are just wrapping up right now the 1 month this year in which Congress has actually gone to work. When the Republican Party took over control of the House of Representatives, you may remember that one of the things they did is they gave themselves a lot less time at work. They changed the calendar for themselves. They expanded their vacation periods. They said they would work fewer days. The way they moved around the calendar made it so that this month that we're in right now, July, is the only month in this session of Congress so far in which they have actually worked 4 weeks in a row. It's exhausting. And so naturally now they have to give themselves an entire month off to recover, maybe a little longer. Congress is due to leave at the end of next week for at least a month. And one of the things they are now warning they may not be able to do is anything about what was the other biggest scandal of the summer that they all said they cared about so much. The crisis that they were going to put aside all partisanship for, right? They were going to put aside everything to deal with it because it meant so much to us as a nation. It was a matter of our national honor. Congress is apparently now maybe not going to do anything about it, about the VA. The VA scandal that riveted the nation for weeks, that got every member of Congress pounding their chest about how they were going to do the right thing and how important this was to fix. Well, the Senate passed a bill for the VA. The House passed a different version of a bill for the VA. They're supposed to be working right now to resolve the differences between those two bills and send something to the president's desk. But it's been sitting there for 6 weeks, totally bottlenecked. House Republicans say they don't want to spend the money. And apparently that is the basis of it not going forward. So it's fizzling, no fix. This week, 16 major veterans organizations wrote to Congress. They all signed on to the same letter, pleading for Congress to please get it done. Listen, both houses passed a bill. In the Senate, the two co-sponsors were John McCain and Bernie Sanders, right? That's almost a bridge too far in terms of the ideological spread. The work here is 95% done, but because it is this Congress, apparently they cannot finish it. There was a glimmer of hope coming into this week that maybe this was the week that Congress might be able to get this done. That's how the week started. Here's how it went over the course of the week. Roll call. VA talks collapse. Military Times. VA reform bill stalled by partisan bickering. The Hill. Talks on veterans bill in full meltdown. There are 4 working days between now and when Congress pats itself on the back for having done nothing and takes more than a month off. They have left more undone than any other Congress in the history of the United States of America, including our basic responsibility to have American ambassadors around the world. But even for a Congress this failed and this reviled by the American people for it, the one thing they all say they supposedly care about and they supposedly want to get done is take care of our veterans and fix the outrageous problems they have all been complaining about in which veterans were not getting care. Congress now has 4 days to do it. All of the major veterans organizations in the country say it looks like it's not going to happen unless something changes. They are sounding the alarm this week. This Congress is, quantitatively speaking, the worst Congress ever. But if they cannot get this done, if they cannot get it done for veterans, they are not only worse than ever before, they are worse than anyone thought possible. This is astonishing if they cannot get this done. Can they get it done?